Monk mode. Disappear for 90 days means stepping away from noise so purpose can speak, and trust me, silence builds strength. For 90 days, no applause, no excuses, just discipline showing up every single day. While others watch, you work. While others talk, you grow, and that's how greatness is forged. It won't be easy, but nothing meaningful ever is, and pressure, my friend, makes diamonds. So disappear for a while, do the work in the dark, and come back so prepared they can't ignore you. 1. Discipline over distraction. 2. Growth in silence. 3. Consistency creates greatness. Discipline over distraction sounds simple, almost too simple, yet it's the line that separates people who dream from people who do, and when you really sit with it, you realize discipline isn't about punishment or living like a robot. It's about choosing what matters most over what feels good right now, and in a world screaming for your attention every second, that choice becomes a daily battle, sometimes hourly, sometimes minute by minute, because distractions don't knock politely, they barge in wearing comfort, entertainment, validation, and easy pleasure. And before you know it, hours are gone, days are wasted, and potential quietly slips through your fingers. So discipline steps in like a stern but loving coach saying, "Not today." Because every time you say no to distraction, you're saying yes to your future, and that future doesn't care about your excuses. It only responds to your habits, the small, boring, unglamorous habits done consistently when nobody's watching, and that's where monk mode begins, not with some dramatic announcement, not with motivation posters, but with a quiet decision to take control back from the noise, to wake up early when the bed feels warmer, to work when scrolling feels easier, to train your mind to focus even when it begs you to quit, because discipline is really self-respect in action. It's telling yourself, I trust you enough to do what you said you'd do. And trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild, even with yourself, so every skipped commitment, every delayed task, every "I'll do it tomorrow," chips away at that trust, while every disciplined choice, no matter how small, builds it brick by brick, turning chaos into clarity. And here's the truth people don't like to hear. You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your discipline, and distractions are designed to keep you average, to keep you comfortable, to keep you busy but not productive, entertained but not fulfilled. And if you're not careful, you'll spend years reacting instead of creating, consuming instead of building, watching other people live the life you told yourself you wanted. And that regret, that quiet ache of unrealized potential, that's far more painful than discipline ever will be, because discipline hurts now, but regret hurts forever. And when you choose discipline over distraction for 90 days, something powerful happens. Your mind starts to sharpen, your confidence grows. Not from words, but from evidence, from seeing yourself show up again and again, and slowly, the things that once felt hard become normal, the focus that once felt forced becomes natural, and the distractions lose their grip, because you've trained yourself to sit with discomfort instead of running from it. And that's a rare skill, a dangerous skill, the kind that separates leaders from followers, because leaders aren't more talented, they're more disciplined. They do what needs to be done long after the mood has left, and don't get it twisted. Discipline isn't about being perfect. You'll stumble, you'll slip, you'll have days where you fall short, but discipline is getting back up without making excuses, without turning one bad moment into a bad week. It's forgiving yourself quickly and refocusing immediately, because the disciplined mind doesn't dwell on failure, it learns and moves forward, and as the days stack up, you start to notice something else. The noise fades, not because the world got quieter, but because you got stronger. Your attention becomes intentional, your time becomes protected, and you stop giving your best energy to things that don't pay you back. emotionally, mentally, or spiritually, and that's when momentum kicks in, because focus creates momentum, and momentum creates belief, and belief fuels even more discipline, a powerful loop that keeps pulling you upward, and people around you might not understand it. They'll say you've changed, that you're distant, that you're obsessed, but what they really mean is you're no longer available for nonsense, and that's the price of growth, temporary isolation for permanent elevation, because you can't build a new life with the same distractions that ruined the old one, and deep down, you know it, you feel it when you sit alone with your thoughts, that quiet voice reminding you of what you're capable of if you just lock in, if you just stop negotiating with weakness, because discipline is freedom, freedom from impulse, freedom from regret, freedom from living someone else's agenda. And when you master discipline over distraction, you don't just change your schedule, you change your identity. You become someone who finishes, someone who follows through, someone who can be trusted with bigger dreams, heavier responsibilities, and greater success. And that's why these 90 days matter, not because of what you'll lose, but because of who you'll become, a person who no longer waits to feel ready, a person who acts despite fear, boredom, or doubt, a person who understands that every focused hour is a vote for the life they want, and once you taste that power, once you see what disciplined focus can produce, there's no going back, because distractions will always be there, louder than ever. But so will your discipline, sharper, stronger, and unshakable. And when those two collide, discipline wins every single time. Growth in silence is one of the most misunderstood ideas in a world addicted to noise, because people think progress needs an audience, that improvement has to be announced, posted, liked, and validated, but real growth, the kind that changes your character and not just your appearance, happens quietly, away from applause, away from opinions, away from the constant need to explain yourself. And when you choose silence, you're not hiding, you're building, you're stepping into a private agreement with yourself that says, I'm going to work even when nobody's watching. And that's a powerful promise, because silence removes pressure, it removes comparison, and it removes the temptation to perform instead of improve. And when there's no crowd, no commentary, no instant feedback, you're forced to listen to yourself, to confront your weaknesses without excuses, to face your fears without distraction, and to sharpen your strengths without ego getting in the way, because silence doesn't flatter you, it tells you the truth, and the truth, while uncomfortable, is the fastest path to growth. And this is why monk mode works, because when you disappear, you stop reacting and start creating, you stop explaining and start executing, and instead of spending energy proving who you are, you invest it in becoming who you said you wanted to be. And at first, silence feels strange, almost heavy, because you've been conditioned to fill every gap with sound, with scrolling, with talking, with consuming. But once you sit in it long enough, you realize silence is not empty, it's full of answers, it's where clarity lives, it's where focus sharpens, and it's where discipline gets stronger, because without noise, there's nowhere to hide, and that's where growth begins, in that uncomfortable space where excuses don't echo back at you, where motivation fades and commitment takes over, and slowly, day by day, something shifts. You become less interested in attention and more interested in results, less concerned with being seen and more concerned with being solid. And that's a dangerous transformation, because people who grow in silence don't need permission, they don't need validation, and they don't need to announce their next move. They just move. And when you grow in silence, you protect your energy, because every explanation costs something. Every debate drains focus. Every opinion pulls you off center, and silence keeps you aligned. It keeps your mind clean, your goals clear, and your progress uninterrupted. And that doesn't mean you isolate forever. It means you isolate with intention, long enough to build something worth revealing. Because premature exposure kills potential, talking about goals before they're grounded often gives a false sense of achievement, and your mind gets tricked into thinking the work is done when it's barely started. But silence keeps you hungry, it keeps the fire burning, it keeps the edge sharp. Because nothing is more motivating than private progress, seeing yourself get better without anyone clapping, lifting heavier, thinking clearer, working longer, and showing up stronger than you did yesterday. And that confidence hits different, it's quiet, it's steady, it doesn't need to prove itself, and as weeks pass in silence, your patience grows, your emotional control strengthens, and your tolerance for nonsense drops, because you've tasted what focus feels like, and you're not willing to trade it for cheap noise anymore, and people may misinterpret your silence. They might think you've fallen off, lost motivation, or faded away, but what they don't see is the foundation you're laying, the habits you're cementing, the mindset you're reshaping, because growth is not loud in its early stages. It's subtle, like roots digging deep before the tree ever breaks the surface, and the deeper the roots, the stronger the tree, and silence gives you time to grow those roots mentally, emotionally, spiritually, because when you're not constantly talking, you're observing. When you're not reacting, you're reflecting, and reflection is where wisdom is born. You start noticing patterns in your behavior, triggers in your emotions, limits in your thinking, and instead of running from them, you work through them quietly, patiently, relentlessly, and that's how real change happens, not overnight, not in front of a crowd, but in repetition, in solitude, in moments no one else sees. And there's something powerful about knowing your progress doesn't depend on external praise, because praise can disappear, applause can fade, but self-respect lasts, and silence builds that self-respect, because every day you keep a promise to yourself without telling anyone. Your identity shifts. You stop seeing yourself as someone who talks and start seeing yourself as someone who does, and that identity becomes your anchor, even when motivation drops, even when doubt creeps in, because silence teaches you to rely on discipline, not hype, and discipline doesn't need noise to function. It thrives in quiet, it grows stronger when distractions fade, and that's why after 90 days of silent growth, you don't come back loud, you come back different, calmer, sharper, more grounded, and people feel it before they hear it, because your presence carries weight, your words carry intention, and your actions speak louder than any announcement ever could. And that's the irony: when you grow in silence, you end up being heard without trying, respected without demanding it, and recognized without chasing it, because real growth has a frequency, and when you're tuned into it, you don't need to broadcast your journey. You just live the results. And that, right there, is the power of growing in silence. Consistency creates greatness, and it's one of those truths that sounds ordinary until you really live it, because greatness isn't built in dramatic moments or sudden breakthroughs. It's built in repetition, in showing up when nothing exciting is happening, when progress feels slow, when results are invisible, and that's where most people quit, not because they are incapable, but because they underestimate the power of staying the course. And consistency doesn't ask for intensity. It asks for loyalty, loyalty to your goals, to your standards, to the version of yourself you're trying to become, even on days when motivation doesn't answer the phone, because motivation is emotional and unreliable, but consistency is a decision, a calm, steady choice to keep moving forward regardless of mood, weather, applause, or setbacks, and that choice, repeated daily, compounds into something unstoppable, because every small action stacks, every focused hour adds up. Every disciplined day becomes a brick in a foundation that cannot be shaken, and the truth is, people admire results but rarely respect the process that creates them, the early mornings, the boring routines, the missed distractions, the countless times you showed up and nothing seemed to change. But consistency doesn't promise immediate rewards, it promises inevitable ones, and that's a powerful promise if you're patient enough to honor it, because consistency is what trains your mind to trust itself. When you say you'll do something and then you do it again and again, you build internal credibility, and that confidence doesn't come from words or affirmations. It comes from evidence, from looking back and knowing you didn't quit when it got uncomfortable. And once that trust is built, you stop negotiating with yourself, you stop making excuses, and you start operating from identity instead of emotion, because you no longer ask, "Do I feel like it?" You ask, "Who am I?" And if you see yourself as someone who shows up, then showing up becomes non-negotiable, and that's where greatness starts to feel normal, not because the work gets easier, but because your tolerance for discipline gets stronger. And consistency also removes pressure, because you're not trying to win the day in one move, you're just trying to win today, and then do it again tomorrow. And that mindset keeps you grounded. It keeps you focused on progress instead of perfection, because perfection paralyzes, but consistency liberates. It gives you permission to be imperfect while still moving forward, and over time, those imperfect efforts polish themselves, skills sharpen, habits refine, and what once felt clumsy becomes second nature, because repetition is the greatest teacher, and life rewards those who are willing to be students long enough to master the basics. And here's the part people overlook. Consistency protects you from burnout, because when you rely on bursts of intensity, you burn bright and fade fast. But when you rely on steady effort, you last. You build endurance mentally and emotionally, and endurance is what carries you through long seasons of uncertainty, doubt, and slow progress, and those seasons are inevitable. Anyone telling you otherwise is selling shortcuts, and shortcuts might get attention, but consistency gets results. And when setbacks happen, as they always do, consistency becomes your anchor, because instead of spiraling, you stabilize. Instead of quitting, you adjust, because you understand that one bad day doesn't erase months of effort, and that perspective keeps you in the game, and staying in the game long enough is the real advantage, because most people don't fail, they just stop. They stop trying, stop believing, stop showing up, while consistent people keep going, quietly stacking wins that nobody sees until suddenly everyone does, and then it looks like overnight success. But you know better. You know it was built on mornings you didn't post about, nights you didn't complain about, and habits you repeated even when no one cared. And consistency also sharpens your character, because doing the right thing repeatedly, especially when it's hard, builds integrity, and integrity creates inner peace, because you're not fighting yourself, you're aligned, your actions match your intentions, and that alignment creates clarity, confidence, and momentum is powerful, because once it starts rolling, it pulls you forward even on days you feel tired. And people will ask how you stay disciplined, how you stay focused, how you stay ahead, and the answer won't be glamorous, it'll be simple. You didn't stop, you didn't wait for perfect conditions, you didn't quit when it got boring, you just kept going. And consistency also teaches humility, because it reminds you that greatness is earned, not declared, that there's no finish line where you can relax forever, only levels that require renewed commitment, and that humility keeps you grounded, keeps you learning, keeps you improving. And that's why consistent people keep growing while others plateau, because they respect the process enough to repeat it even after success shows up. And that's rare, because many people become inconsistent once results arrive. They celebrate too long, relax too much, and slowly slide back. But greatness demands consistency, not just in pursuit, but in maintenance, in protecting what you've built. And that's a higher level of discipline. And during these 90 days of monk mode, consistency becomes your language, your routine becomes your power, and your daily actions become your signature, because every day you show up, you're casting a vote for the future you want. And those votes add up quietly, steadily, relentlessly, until one day you look back and realize you're no longer chasing greatness, you're living it, not because of talent, luck, or timing, but because you stayed consistent when quitting would have been easier, and that's the truth. Consistency doesn't just create greatness, it reveals it, because greatness was never about doing more than everyone else in one moment. It was about doing what most people won't do for longer than their